Hi, everyone. Welcome to Provoked, where we discuss interesting issues, we stimulate the mind, we discuss contemporary matters, and we are very interested in philosophy, one of our cornerstones. Today, we have a very important guest, somebody I admire a lot, someone I learned from, Dr. Alex Catter from the University of Cambridge, a philosopher and someone I really look up to. Welcome, Dr. Alex.
Thanks, Tolu. That's a lovely welcome. Really appreciate it.
No, very much deserved. So, Alex, why don't you tell us about yourself and how you came to become a philosopher?
Oh, good question. It's actually quite a disappointing answer. It's the truthful one though, and I can't help but give a truthful answer. The truthful answer is I got into philosophy through apathy. I was Generation X. I was one of those people who thought, well, I don't want to be an accountant. I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I don't really want to be anything. What's important to me? And questions like, is there a God? Is there truth? Do we have free will? All those sorts of questions, though they still had a hold on me. So it was more through distaste for any kind of real engagement with life that I engaged with philosophy, which is the worst way into philosophy, just to be clear. And that's not where I've ended up. That's not where I am now. So where I started with apathy, I am now very much wholesale into the idea of teaching philosophy, engaging people in interesting questions. We'll talk a lot about that because I know that the theme for the inaugural podcast on Thought Provoked is to talk about provocation, is to talk about questioning. So that's where I really have my home. I try to get us to think as little as possible, so I want the audience to be aware of that. I like us to think about practical things rather than just be thinking about thought all the time. Philosophers do that too much. So applied thought, that's where I'm at. And I'm really interested in like problems and in wonder and in perplexity, which is, I think, where we should be living most of our lives.
Perfect. Wonderful. Yes. And that just takes us very nicely to the first question you've already alluded to. So the first question about provocation. Yeah, why don't you tell us more about provocation? What is it and what's interesting about it?
Yeah, so I try to avoid references to Wittgenstein simply because I do them far too often, like I'm doing right now. And I'm going to start with a reference to Wittgenstein because I can't help it, but partly because there was a collection of his works, or there was a kind of review of his philosophy that was called Questions Without Answers. And that's really what I'm interested in, is questions that don't have set answers. So questions like, when was the Battle of Salamis? 480 BC. What's the quickest way to Colchester? Well, take this road, then this road. Those have fixed answers, whereas questions like, how should I live? Um, what do we think creativity is? Can AI be creative? Sorry, those sorts of questions are problems in and of themselves, and they lead to two different kinds of wonder. So there's a kind of wonder which is, I wonder what the answer is, and then you get it, and the wonder goes away. And then there's a kind of wonder where you wonder at things, and no matter how many answers you get, you keep wondering. And that is the kind of question that I think motivates real philosophy, or at least the philosophy that I'm interested in. And yet, it's not necessarily it's not that appealing an area of philosophy, because I think it can be quite, what, quote unquote, nasty. That's the word that Wittgenstein uses to describe these kinds of questions, where we're talking about what is Britishness, for instance, leads to these kind of nasty questions, these kind of difficult, uncomfortable things. And I think the crucial thing is not to shy away from those. So really important to think of provocation as something that you sit with uncomfortably, right? It's a question, but it's something that gives you discomfort. And it's something that's problematic start to finish. It doesn't leave you at a certain point. So provocation is a starting point, yes, but it doesn't have a fixed end point. And I think that's the crucial thing.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, why would people like provocation if it doesn't leave them? Oh, it comes from this place of discomfort. That's a reason to shy away from it. And I think that's why lots of people shy away from questions like this. It just seems like you're asking for trouble, really. And that's one. it's something, a label that philosophers get. Why are you asking? What's the point of asking?
It's a
Uh,
really good point, and I think that the issue for me is around. So my comfort zone is being uncomfortable. I'm never more happy than when someone invites me onto a podcast to say, talk about something of which you can pretend to be an expert, but which you don't really have expertise in. Because who has expertise in all of provocation? No one, right? So I'll pretend to have that kind of expertise. Um, but being outside my comfort, being asked to teach something which I've never taught before is more joyous to me than being asked to teach the same class I've taught 50 times for the 51st time. So being outside of my comfort zone is where I want to be, which I realize jars with how many other people might live their lives, where comfort is not a bad thing. I don't mean, and there are places where I want comfort to be things that I am familiar with, right? I like watching cozy mysteries, like Agatha Christie mysteries, for instance, that kind of thing, where I know the outcome, I know the answer, it doesn't matter. I'm just watching this to sort of switch off my brain a little bit. So there is also that element to it as well, and that we all live our lives wanting a little bit of comfort. Um, but I think one of the dangers of comfort is that if you only have comforting things to think about, if you only think in comfortable ways, you're not creating, you're not leading, you're not self-actualizing. There's a wonderful pyramid, right, Maslow's pyramid, which has this kind of self-actualization part to it. And the psychologist Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a Hungarian psychologist, he said, in order to achieve flow, which is that creative state that we all know and love, that feeling that I'm doing my best, I'm achieving it. It's hard, but it's not painful. It's joyous in that sense, and so that sense of flow comes from being challenged slightly beyond your skill level. You have to be somewhat uncomfortable. You have to be willing to risk. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to push yourself beyond. And I have to say I love that feeling. But too far, and we feel anxious. And I think that's the problem sometimes, is that philosophy sort of throws you in at the deep end, and you can suddenly feel anxious because these are questions which I don't even know how to begin answering them. So the idea is to tease people into it, I guess.
that's very interesting. Let me try and be provoked, if I may. So the concept of a supreme being that created everything, that seems to be provoking to a lot of people. I myself, I do want to confess, I'm a Christian. I was
Mm-hmm.
raised in a Christian home. There was a time when I stopped believing in God, but I sort of had a revelation, and I believe again. Um, so, in terms of provoking questions, is that I well, would that be a provoking question? I mean, there are two arguments, right? So some would say, if there is a God, who created the God? Or if there's a divine creator, then how did the divine creator come to be? And if there is no divine creator, then how did the world come to be? Through a big bang, but then where did the big bang come from? I was reading today, actually, some scientists were saying that we might live in a black hole. So this would mean that we are a smaller part of a larger multiverse. So there are other universes and things like that. And you keep reading stuff like this. You keep reading all kinds of theories about the origins of the universe. But in terms of a provoking question, where does that lie? Is that one of those things that makes lots of people uncomfortable? And how would you suggest young philosophers like myself should? I say young, I do have a bit of gray now. should,
I'm often mistaken for being younger than I am. That's why I have the beard, because I want to try and convince my students that who are often older than me that I've got some wisdom behind my teeth.
you do.
Um, um, so yeah, I mean, I'm a philosopher of religion by background. So the idea of religion, the idea of God, grabs me, not least because I lost my atheism, by the way, which is, so it was a loss of faith of a different kind. So I was an ardent atheist, a kind of village atheist, attacking that which I didn't even believe in the first place. And then I read Wittgenstein and I realized that atheists and theists can both be wrong. That is a provocation, right? Because you're saying the existence of God or the non-existence of God, why are either relevant? As Kierkegaard puts it, God does not exist. He is eternal, right? If you go into a shop and they give you the wrong change, it's no consolation if they say, oh, don't worry, numbers don't exist, right? So the idea of existence here could be irrelevant. And then what are we talking about then if we're not talking about the existence of God? What are we engaging with? We're engaging with an idea that I can't imagine living in the world without seeing God in it. That's what religious faith is. It's feeling judged. It's feeling wretched rather than wrong, right? There's this sense of like sin being sort of a sickness as opposed to a mistake. And I think we live in a world where it's very uncomfortable for people to engage with that kind of conversation, not just on the basis of the philosophical discussion and also challenging people on their beliefs. No one wants to say to someone, oh, you're wrong to believe in God, right? People feel uncomfortable doing this. But I think there are also difficulties around engaging with questions like, should I feel wretched or is it just a mistake? I can't help the way I am, right? And of course, the letter to the Romans, St. Paul's letter to the Romans, he says, God has made you a vessel of wrath or a vessel of grace, and yet you are responsible. So he says, oh, absolutely, you've been made this way. You can't help how you are, but you're still responsible. But, right, that's a provocation because, again, it's putting you in the position of feeling that tension, that pull between responsibility and avoiding responsibility. And that's when we feel uncomfortable, is when we're being pushed or pulled one way or the other.
Interesting. Very nice way to put it. You mentioned Kierkegaard, and I know we studied Kierkegaard as well at the University of Cambridge when I was doing the postgraduate certificate in philosophy, and that was a fantastic course. I highly recommend to anyone. So please go register and go for it. And I do remember one of the topics we talked on was death and this existentialism. And I was watching something. I do confess I was brain rotting on the Instagram, and a video came up, and somebody was saying, this belief in whether there's a life after death, whether this is the end. He was imagining a conversation between two twins in the womb, and one of them was like, "Oh, do you think there's something after birth?" The other was like, "There can't be anything after birth. That's the end. How are we going to survive without the umbilical cord? They were saying, can't you imagine a world where we're walking, where we're talking, where we can eat without the umbilical cord? It can't exist. It says, okay, is there a mother? Where's mother? Where is I can't see mother now? And it was like, we are in mother now, and things like that. And yeah, I guess there are lots of provoking questions around God. I'm trying to remember the name of the philosopher whose whole idea was that we are in God. We are Spinoza, yes, Spinoza. And and then you have other forms of ideas around God and where is God now and why is there suffering and why is there so much injustice if there is a God or where. So and really that question around death, I think that's another one, and what happens after. I don't know if there's anybody you feel I should be reading or anyone whose views you think are interesting around that particular provoking question.
Well, shock horror, I'm going to firstly mention Wittgenstein, who was influenced by Spinoza. His Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus derives its name from another Tractatus written by Spinoza. He also made use of this phrase, the subspecie aeternitatis, which is the point of view of eternity. So it's viewing your life from the point of view of eternity. And this is fundamentally important because Wittgenstein raised a provocation. He was the master of provocations. He would ask a question that sort of made us feel uncomfortable. And here's his question. What answers come from having more life? Right? It's a great question because what he's saying is if life is a puzzle in these 80-something years that we get, maybe we get lucky and get 100 years or something, or maybe we're unlucky and get 100 years, but we get a certain fixed period of time. If that's problematic or puzzling to you, why do you think more of it would help? So So your point about the twins in the womb saying, oh, well, maybe there's a place we can eat and walk well, they can't eat and walk there.
Mm.
So either they're imagining a completely different conception of what life is, in which case, how is that any different from death, right? To not, if I was to imagine a life completely different from this one, where I can't talk to people, I can't think, I can't breathe, I can't eat, I can't sleep. If I didn't do any of those things, then what's it for? And by the way, this is not a new idea. This is an old idea. If you go back and look at the Bible, and again, this is a selective reading. Every reading of the Bible is a selective reading, but there are selective readings where you can derive things like heaven is not a place that you go to. I think it's Luke that says this, right? It's not a place to look for. It's a completely different thing. And to speak to your twins example, for instance, there's a widow who loses 6 husbands. They're all 7 brothers, right? So she marries 7 brothers ultimately, the last husband being the one that she dies with. And someone asked Jesus, who will be her husband in heaven? Because she has 7 of them. So who will be the husband in heaven? And Jesus says, there is no marriage in heaven. And again, Wittgensteinians are very quick to sort of seize on that and go, oh, okay, well, if there's no marriage in heaven, then there can't be any sleeping in heaven, talking in heaven, breathing in heaven. Well, that doesn't necessarily follow. But certainly this idea that what are we looking for from an afterlife? Is it to give our life meaning? And if so, do we need to look beyond this life? And this is where people like Nietzsche, like Kierkegaard, who is a Christian, who doesn't believe in an afterlife. Jesus was a Jew. He may not have believed in an afterlife. The point is more eternal life, not immortality. Eternal life is this life viewed eternally, not an endless life.
That is very interesting. That is fantastic.
And provoking.
You are absolutely provoking. Right. I mean, we said we were going to talk about a particular thought-provoking question, and it's about climate change. I'm one of those who believes in about 90 plus % of scientists. Climate change is real and is caused by human activities. Some people do not. And what is provoking is that, or could be provoking, is that we might have to have lower standards of living, or make very serious adjustments if we are going to stop this climate change and the disasters to follow. So yeah, what is that? Is that provoking enough? And what's your view on that?
Good. Yeah. So I mean, the provocation being is individualism the biggest threat to sustainability, right? So, and I think this cuts across those kind of political or even scientific divides around whether or not it's okay. As you say, the vast majority of people agree that climate change is human influenced, but I would also argue that almost everyone, and I would be surprised to hear there's anyone who thinks that they want to pollute the environment that they live in. So, for instance, I doubt very much that the climate skeptics are throwing rubbish out of their windows into their garden. I doubt that happens, right? Or just dropping litter or rubbish on the floor, or inviting asbestos into their home, right? So the environment is important, is all we need to assume from this point of view. And there were people going back 50 years who were saying the model of economics that we have right now is unsustainable. It cannot possibly be the case that you can live beyond your means endlessly. I mean, by the way, the very same people who are often climate skeptics are often those people who say we have to live within our means economically. Well, the economy is one kind of ecology, but there is another kind of ecology, namely the ecosystem. So you could argue that those two things, and by the way, those same people used to be ecologists. They used to be all in favor of the climate. It became very much a kind of semantic form that they were opposed to. But why the reason for this particular provocation? And it came from a student who was interviewing me for an interview, and I felt so guilty because I was so lacking in hope. So I'm going to apologize now for all the kind of doom and gloom that's going to come out of this. But for me, it's this idea that what is the greatest challenge that we have to overcome? And it has to be our own desire for stuff, right? As you said, like, what are we willing to give up? And I'll just sort of end on this point before we continue the conversation. But just one thing that struck me was they were thinking about bringing congestion charges to Cambridge,
Yeah.
and this was opposed. Now, I do not care politically if congestion charges are a good idea or a bad idea, or even if they have the right effect. What I am interested in is that was seen as a bridge too far.
Mm.
And it just feels that if we can't even conceive of congestion charges, how on earth are we going to conceive of people giving up Amazon or giving, daily, like immediate delivery, or giving up the idea of going out for dinner, 2 times a month, let alone, twice a week. So just the sacrifices we have to make are just in orders of magnitude far higher than we seem to be willing to make them.
Yeah, I mean, today, as I was cleaning the studio, getting ready for this podcast, I started thinking about fast fashion. I was actually thinking about fast electronics because I was thinking of the speakers, I was thinking of the microphone. I was like, should I have gotten a more expensive version, or should I have gotten something you could just use quickly, And it got me thinking. So fast fashion, fast, and things that we just
Past everything.
fast everything. Um, but for me, as an economist, to be provoking, I think there is this sense of injustice in the sense that the super wealthy, those who have billions and who are building underground bunkers and who are going to space. And I was just reading, for instance, I think Elon Musk's company, and I'm not trying to throw shade on Elon Musk, whatever people's views are on him. Some people love him, some people hate him. I think in terms of the number of satellites they have orbiting, it's now sort of creating a problem for astronomers. And yeah, this idea that we could go on and on. I was reading something about how wealthy you would have to be, how much money you'd have had to make since Jesus Christ was born to have as much money as Elon Musk. If they paid you, I think 100,000 every day, you still wouldn't, or every week, you still wouldn't have enough, or you still wouldn't have 50% of what he had, or a figure like that. So I think people feel that the super wealthy, I could be wrong, but people feel that those who have benefited from the system should sort of give more. But the way the economy and the way it's structured, it seems that the middle class are the ones who have to make the most sacrifices. It seems that there is this skewing, and if you look at what's happening in the political arena right now in the USA, and what seems to be I think the Labour government today is trying to cut costs around benefits and things like that. It seems to be like it's the middle class and those who actually don't have enough that should make sacrifices. What about the billionaires, those who have so much more and keep telling us that they made it out of their own sweat? Should it be more of we actually get them to chip in more, and we get them to be less individualistic and to be more communist and more socialist, if we put it that way, towards this agenda itself?
Um, so my feeling is like inequality by itself is not a problem, right? The existence of inequality itself is not a problem. Why? Because the existence of equality is not necessarily a good thing. There was an awful lot of equality during the Stone Age, because if you had 2 stones, you were rich. So the Stone Age has great amounts of equality, but I wouldn't say a great amount of well-being or welfare, right? So identifying where the problem is absolutely matters. And I agree with you that there are certain people carrying more burdens than others. But I also think there is, I'm just going to, again, to be provocative, is suggest that in part the problem as well is that we defer to the billionaires because there are fewer of them, right? So we think democratically and we think, oh, it's surely their responsibility. But at the same time, the other side of that coin is equally problematic, right? In the 80s and 90s, the move was to make littering a problem of individuals, right? It's your fault that litter exists on the streets, so stop littering. And that worked for littering. It genuinely did. It reduced littering, but it's now seen as one of the most unacceptable things you can do is just throw rubbish out of your car window, and it is, I hold the same sentiment. But that was a good way of, sort of placing the responsibility on the shoulders of the people who were creating the problem. In this situation, that seems, as you noted, that seems to be the same move, the same playbook that's being adopted for sustainability, and that seems wrong to me because that's not really where the problems lie. For instance, one thing we haven't mentioned is how much plastic is right now sitting in my brain, right? How much plastic is actually absorbed into my blood system and into my brain. And that isn't something we're going to be easily able to fix. We can fix CO2 emissions much more easily. And again, I'm not suggesting it's easy, but much more easily than we can remove microplastics from the environment. And we have no idea what the impact of that is either. And again, I would imagine those people who are climate skeptics are going to be challenged by the idea that they're at least 0.3% plastic, and in the parts of their body they really do not want it. So okay, so that's all very critical. It's all saying like, okay, who's responsible? I would say industry certainly seems to me to be a place where, I mean, if it's possible to get the kinds of profits that Elon Musk has received from Tesla, then it must seemingly be possible to get those same kind of profits for something which we all benefit from, like this. So to your question, yes, we could imagine that. But all of the suggestions seem to me to be a kind of added price point, right? So they're like carbon taxes or emission trading schemes, which don't seem to necessarily reduce the amount of pollution, and actually may make it harder for actually those people who are at the lower end of that spectrum. So if you're a logger in British Columbia, you won't be able to be logging anymore because we don't need the wood for burning anymore. So sorry, you're out of a job. You can't transfer that job somewhere else. Elon Musk, however, could go and run, well, apparently the American government, but apparently he could move to another company other than Tesla, which most people don't have the luxury of.
That's a very good point. I mean, just to return to this before we move on, and I'm conscious of the time. In terms of industry, though, so what you find is industry, and we can have this example of the oil industry, for instance, right? So you've had these oil companies make lots of profit, like you've said, from climate polluting activities. Trump is talking about clean coal, drill, baby, drill. And in terms of the little guy or the middle class, or even those who are very low down the ladder, the only thing they have to trade is their labor. So they can only go and work where jobs exist. But those who can actually make the decisions are those at the top of the ladder. And they have all of this wealth, they have all of this power. But there is just, and they seem to be denying or in denial about some of these issues. So, I understand what you said about inequality. Um, it's I don't know. There's somebody whose podcast I also follow. I might be throwing him a bone here. Gary's Economics. So I do know. I don't know if you've watched Gary's Economics, and he's all about inequality being one of the real problems around the UK right now. Passive income and passive wealth, buying up assets, buying up houses, buying up stock, buying up gold, and the middle class not being able to compete. I just don't know. So I understand that individuals should have more responsibility. I totally buy that. I'm just trying to get my head around the billionaires now not having more responsibility. Because if individuals, if say, my contribution to all of this is, I don't know how many grams I pollute a year, but these guys who own the factories, who own actually the means of production, make those decisions. Shouldn't we put more burden on them?
I couldn't agree more. Look, I agree around the inequality in itself can be problematic. It's not problematic in and of itself, by which I mean just the existence of inequality isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. I think I
But
agree with that.
when you reach a certain level of inequality, then we might start to see problems like the ones you're describing, where people can't get on the housing ladder, for instance, where it starts to produce inequality. Inequality that produces inequality, that is a problem.
Yeah.
Inequality by itself is not a problem. But I also, and this cuts to the sort of central question that we were asking around individualism, is if we are asking billionaires to give up their money, they won't. So the ones who actually have power are not the billionaires, because they can't do it any more than if I asked you to give up more money, you wouldn't do it. And if someone asked me, I wouldn't do it. But if we ask the billionaires, they're not going to do it either, because individualism reigns. So what does that require? It requires, to your point, some element of socialism, or what I think Bill Maher calls capitalism plus. This idea of kind of you need an enhancement to capitalism. Like everyone likes motorways, right? Everyone likes airports. Everyone likes trade, the ability to trade goods. These are socialist principles because they're paid for by the state. Well, the state therefore has these powers, and it's the state therefore that can control and rein in some of this inequality and some of this unsustainability.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you. I was just going to ask about Wittgenstein because you mentioned him. Excuse me. What exactly draws you to him? Why exactly are you so or such a fan? Why are you so in love with this man?
So the man himself is a horrible pain in the neck to everyone he ever knew. He was not a nice man. His most shameful act was hitting a child, for instance, when he was a school teacher. Wittgenstein was almost certainly on the spectrum, and he found it very hard to teach children who didn't get it. So that's probably why he went to Cambridge, where he could find elites who were very intelligent and be able to deal only with them and not have to deal with people who couldn't get it. So he is not a paragon of virtue. His philosophy, however, is very interesting. But you're right to note that Wittgensteinians do give off this air of saying, oh, this man, almost like they're disciples of a holy man, where they'll say, well, Wittgenstein said, as if that settles the question. And I'm not one of those people, I hope. I would drop Wittgenstein tomorrow if I found that another philosophy gave me the same thing, but without any of the problems. I genuinely don't find problems in Wittgenstein's account. And again, if people are watching this and they're able to comment, drop a comment to explain why you think Wittgenstein's wrong. But I have seen many of the objections to his view, and he holds up. And it's that consistency, it's that the fact that also he quite rightly focuses on questions, not answers. I think a good philosophy is about that. As Zizek puts it, philosophy is the art of asking the right questions. And Wittgenstein asked the right questions in his day.
Yes.
And we need to keep doing that today, asking the right questions, provoking the right thoughts.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Alex Carter. On that note, we will call it a day. Thank you so much for that fantastic conclusion on provoking the right thoughts. I hope you have been thought provoked. I definitely have been. Thanks to you, Dr. Alex Carter. And hopefully, we'll see at Cambridge or around at some point. And I do recommend the course, the postgraduate certificate in philosophy at Cambridge, and of course the other courses you run. And thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Tolu. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, guys. We hope you have been thought provoked, and see you soon. Bye. Bye now. Bye. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Thought Provoked podcast. My name is Tolu, and I am your host. I have a PhD in economics and a postgraduate certificate in philosophy. And I started the Thought Provoked podcast so that we could discuss issues that might not have very easy answers. In this podcast, we hope to discuss issues that might require some abstract conceptualization, some in-depth introspection, some thinking outside of the box, but of course issues that are thought-provoked. I hope you enjoyed the content. Please hit the like button and subscribe. Also, you can share these videos with your friends. Thank you. I hope you remain thought-provoked.